Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar, Unchain Your Data, an IT Leader's Guide to Escaping Information Silos in the AEC. So some quick introductions. You've got myself on the session today, Lucy Pryor, the Sales Director here at Mail Manager. You've got Stephanie Faber, which is the Product Manager at Mail Manager, and Tim Setchfield, Head of Collaboration Product at IdeaGen. So what are we covering today? The first thing we're going to start with is talking about what the current information management landscape looks like in the AEC. We'll then move on to how digital tools and technology are shaping the industry. We'll then touch upon the limitations of current solutions like Microsoft 365, how to fit email management into your tech stack, and finally, how we can help you modernize your information management in-house. We're going to leave some time today for Q&A with Steph and Tim. So any questions, please use the chat facility or the Q&A facility, which we'll go through at the end. So just one thing I wanted to start with is when it comes to technology, the most important thing to keep in mind is that outdated tools lead to ultimately outdated results. Sticking with outdated tools means effectively getting left behind. These systems create isolated pockets of information, which make it really hard to get what you need and slows down the whole workflow, which is a problem because it means teams can't work together as smoothly or as quickly as they probably like to or need to. So let's take a look at the current state of project information management across the AEC. So IdeaGen Mail Manager run an annual survey, which is called the State of AEC Project Management Research Report. And what it aims to do is to discover the project management and collaboration challenges faced by companies globally across the AEC. Now, in our 2023 report, we surveyed 550 AEC leaders, and we explored different things. So mainly focused around how firms manage project information, where they store it, and then finally, how they go about retrieving that data when facing legal disputes. It also provides some good insight into how the industry have been affected by the current global economy. So again, touching on things like the cost of living crisis, supply chain issues, and also the latest building regs. So let's jump into some of the main findings. And I believe you'll be sent around the report after this so you can read it in more detail. So firstly, the majority of firms have stated that they cannot easily access their project information. We actually found that 90% of the respondents were concerned about the accessibility and visibility of their project information. And out of them, over a quarter of organizations have said that they're at risk when staff leave the business. Our research has found that more firms are aware of the importance of filing emails as part of their offboarding process in comparison to last year, but 28% still don't require emails to be filed, and therefore it becomes very difficult to retrieve them. Unsurprisingly, disputes are continuing to arise year on year. And in our 2021 report, 63% of respondents experienced some form of dispute. Last year, that number rose to 91%, so significant increase in comparison years. With regards to the reasons for disputes, project scope changes and payment issues were the key causes, largely because project details were often kind of buried in emails and documents and therefore inaccessible. But again, the main thing still stands that email is still the most commonly used communication and collaboration tool across the industry. So just focusing a little bit more on the economic climate, in the current economic climate, we are seeing trends across the AEC where costs are on the rise, margins are tighter than ever, and there are large staff cutbacks. You know, even with the larger global firms, they're reporting huge drop-offs in profit because their staff costs are increasing. And unfortunately, which you would have seen, more companies are going into administration more now than ever. So with all the uncertainty going on in the world and so many people leaving companies, there is a huge need for organizations to start thinking about, you know, information management as a whole. If we look at some of the stats on the screen, considering 28% of businesses don't have email filing as part of their offboarding process, and 81% of firms use email for the majority of their project correspondence, thousands of firms are still at huge risk of losing information, which is surprising that it's still being, managed that way. And I suppose on top of that, 88% of people we surveyed, their overall volume of emails has continued to increase in the last year. And the contents of those emails are more important now than ever, with 11% of people claiming it's now business critical. And to top this off, almost 2/3 of AEC businesses regularly need to retrieve emails from past projects. So, for many firms, emails and keeping them well organized and accessible has not often been a consideration until something goes wrong. They've got a legal dispute or something like that. That's when they start to focus on it. And realistically, at the end of the day, they hold vital information, scope of works, changes, approvals, contracts, and it really is the difference between winning and losing a dispute. So it needs to be taken more seriously. Now, I know a lot of the people on this call today are going to be in IT roles. So when it comes to IT leaders, 78% of those we've spoken to are stressed out, whether that's from management expectations and pressures, being challenged by internal stakeholders, or you've got really tight deadlines. Most of you on the webinar today can probably relate to needing to do excessive amounts of overtime just to keep up with your everyday tasks. And from our experience, IT are often your go-tos when something goes wrong and project staff need to find crucial project information. And again, that's extremely time consuming. So with so much digital change happening, it's extremely tough for IT leaders. And unfortunately, it often means that email can sometimes get overlooked, even though it is, of course, really important. So, Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you. What can be done about this?
Thanks, Lucy. Nice to speak to everybody. Before we just go into the detail of solving these problems, I just want to look a little bit at the background. It's been really interesting providing software solutions in construction since the late 90s. At that time, we had the advent of active web technology leading to the delivery of solutions to allow you to share content internally and externally. But even then, the challenge of emails, how to store them, how to share them, was an issue. And at that time, we were delivering solutions centering around project inboxes, having to remember to copy those inboxes in emails and forwarding received emails to those inboxes. If you could just move to the next slide, please, Lucy. So the journey that AEC, and we weren't calling it AEC at that point, has gone through from then, seeing the advent of starting to trust electronic storage and transmission of data, moving away from paper, printing emails. It would be interesting to know how many of you are still relying on paper for site-based documents, drawings, etc. With tools that allow you to break down silos, so moving away from storing data in places that only make sense to an individual, in systems that are designed to be standardized and promote the storage of documents, particularly internally and externally. And now obviously we're seeing more document collaborative editing, but email still remains. It's increasing. It's even increasing in every sector, but especially in AEC. I think because it's so convenient to send an email, and it is an autonomous document that represents a point-in-time point of view. Its ownership is clear. I think in terms of legal transmission of information, it's got a strong future, even as we see move towards platforms such as chat. So we're still left with where to store emails centrally and how to share them, and considerations such as how do we make sure that we're clear and able to govern the ownership of that data and to ensure that that data is stored in the correct region. Next slide, please. Looking at the challenges that you might be facing if you're trying to deal with email in just using traditional systems without a specific email tool. you're going to find it very difficult to capture everything. So you're confident that those emails that are going to, yes, they're going to protect you for disputes in the future, but they're also going to help you for any repeat projects of a similar type. How sure can you be that all of those emails are captured as people maybe have changed roles in the business or even left the business? We have the challenge, obviously, the inveterate challenge of managing the storage in mailboxes, mailbox limits being exceeded. And even if you can find a way to store them, you need specialist tools to search them effectively. And the tools you choose should be able to put those emails in a place that is consistent with your internal policies. Next slide, please, Lucy. So Microsoft 365 is probably a platform that all of you are using, at least to provide your Office software. It offers some pretty strong, short, small-scale collaboration, so able to collaborate on documents from an editing point of view, providing the community is not too big, and providing other tools such as chat. But whether that's the right place to store data is dependent on your own policies. We see that being split, with about 20% of our customers storing data in Microsoft 365. But despite some of the strengths and conveniences, there are some significant gaps. There is no real easy way of storing and sharing and searching email in that platform. So you're left without really support for that and wondering where to put those emails. It's not obviously a great place if your corporate governance is not wanting to put email into the Microsoft documents, into the Microsoft ecosystem, then it's not ideal. And increasingly, as chat gets more dominant, how are we going to govern that? How are we going to make sure that those chat messages are available to us in time? As well as Microsoft 365, as well, we have the more traditional legacy document management solutions, which also have their issues. Next slide, please. So these solutions, I was involved in working in this area about 20 years ago, and they have a very broad range of features. They tend to be quite significant in size, and they can be a bit limited by their legacy. The size and scope of them and the legacy software architecture tends to make it hard for them to move with technical changes. The large scope tends to make it hard for them to be performant in terms of particular use cases. So given a given user experience, maybe of the features, is not that strong. There isn't a tendency to integrate strongly with other platforms, and they might require quite a lot of change management to implement. It's really a bit against the trend. The trend that we're seeing is more towards integrated point solutions. So how do we fit email management into all of this? So what we're here really talking about today as a focus is the case for point solutions, particularly in email management, with best of breed software rather than large scale, wide scope solutions. I think the culture that we have, the app culture that we have, tends to raise our expectations. We're all used to having really great applications on our handheld devices, and it creates an appetite and an expectation for best of breed user experience and the ability to keep up with those changing trends. I think something that's very different now than it was 20 odd years ago is that the whole science of integration with the advent of APIs, meaning that storing data in other systems, for example, is very possible now, much more than it was. So having a targeted solution with a smaller footprint makes it possible for the software vendor to keep up with new practices and to keep up with new regulations, but also to exploit technological opportunities, such as AI. So now we're going to focus a little bit more into the specifics of IdeaGen Mail Manager, and I'm handing back over to Lucy. Over to you, Lucy.
Helpful. I took myself off mute. That was really helpful. Thank you, and insightful. Thanks, Tim. So we're now going to touch upon Mail Manager, an email management solution. Now, I can see some familiar names on this webinar, so you'll probably likely have seen or certainly heard of Mail Manager before. But if not, we're going to go into more detail, and obviously more than happy to have some conversations offline. So just starting with key features of Mail Manager. So Mail Manager over the years has developed a powerful and robust search, which allows its users to find any email across any of their projects, literally within a few clicks, using key metadata from an email. And it doesn't matter if you're involved or not. It's just, as long as you've got permissions to the folder it's stored in, you've got access to see it. So really, really easy way of accessing data. It's also recently undergone a facelift using new technology, which makes it much easier to use. And I'm sure, being in IT, you have experienced challenges around getting staff to actually use tools. It can be really difficult. So that certainly helps kind of getting people used to it and making it feel like it's all part of Outlook as well. Another key feature, which is literally the difference between staff filing emails and not filing, is our filing prompt. And it slots in really nicely to that kind of user's workflow. Key thing is it gets staff filing for the minute it's installed. You know, a lot of IT managers will tell me, you know, we've been trying to implement lots of different systems to get staff filing over the years, whether that's shared mailboxes, rules, public folders, but people still don't do it. And that is the difference with Mail Manager. You've got confidence in people filing emails. The other question we get asked a lot from IT roles is, well, this is all great moving forward, but what do we do with our old data, our legacy data? And for many customers, naturally, they've got emails stored in legacy places. So we've got fantastic tools to actually migrate those messages so that they can be searched again when needed, all through Mail Manager efficiently in the future. And then lastly, another customer favorite is the rapid deployment. It's really refreshing. People often question me saying, really, is that it? Because they're so used to these bigger systems, which take, you know, I'm sure Tim's had this with the document management systems, but, you know, 18 months to fully implement. Mail Manager can literally be up and running within a matter of hours. And Steph will probably touch a little bit more in terms of the kind of technical installation, but very light touch, requires little resource, and users are up and running within a couple of hours. So I'm not going to cover all of these points in terms of benefits. I'll let everyone kind of scan through them as we're going over this, but just to pick out three that stand out in particular to myself. And the first is data ownership. Lots and lots of tools out there will hold your data. And to get the data out of it, if you decide to move away in the future, becomes an absolute nightmare and it's costly. So with Mail Manager, we do not hold any of your data. We're simply the bridge between Outlook and where you as a business want to store and centralize your project information. So say that's your server, we're just copying an email from Outlook and putting it against your project folders in your server. The second point is Mail Manager reduces the size of inboxes. And again, we always hear from IT that staff are at their capacity, you know, wondering why their Outlook's crashing. IT have to start putting retention policies in place. With Mail Manager, we free up your storage by automatically archiving those old messages, meaning you no longer have to kind of nag employees to do this and start putting in policies in place. And the final, probably most important thing, which is quite fitting with the session today, is managing risk. The impact of the power of the tool is always felt when you're in that stressful situation and you need to find an email from someone that may have left the company 5 years ago. Often this kind of rests with IT again being the go-to to give someone access to the user's mailbox. They've got to scroll through, spend hours just to find that one important email. Now, because of the power of the Mail Manager search and the visibility and control that users have on projects, finding emails is a breeze. You know, you can do it within a matter of clicks. So just finally, in terms of installation and configuration, as I mentioned, it's super easy to deploy. You'll see that there. So we can install it and push it out by group policy or SCCM. We support you through that process as well. Administrators can manage and control settings. So things like user preferences, what users can and can't do. And we support a whole host of protocols for filing and searching. So things like Procore, ProjectWise, SharePoint, Teams. So most solutions that companies across the AEC are using to store and centralize project information. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background. I'm going to hand over to Steph now, who's going to go into more information about roadmap, more technical aspects of Mail Manager. So Steph, over to you.
Hi everyone. Just want to highlight, if there are any questions, please do ask, and we'll get to them at the end. But yes, onto a little bit more of the technical side. So I'll just kind of pick out a few of the items that you see on the screen. So firstly, the licensing. So Mail Manager licenses users against their primary email address. So it's a per user licensing mechanism. And alongside that, we have what we call our ACM, our account management portal. Essentially what this is it provides you with an overall view of users that have Mail Manager installed with an active license. So you have full visibility of the users that are making use of the Mail Manager application, which from customer feedback, it's very useful. In terms of the locations, so Mail Manager essentially has two methods of managing your filing locations. So the first is manually. So it says what it does on the tin. Essentially what you've got is users can add and remove locations as and when they please. And those locations will obviously be represented in the Mail Manager filing prompt and the search. The other option that we have is auto-discovered locations. So with a little bit of implementation with our teams, essentially how auto-discovery works is it finds the locations that users have access to based on their permissions, and then exposes that in the Mail Manager UI. So when they're filing and searching, this is basically dynamically changing. So if you're in a position where you're adding loads of locations to said protocol that we mentioned earlier, so ProjectWise or SharePoint, essentially those locations will be added or removed as the permissions change. The benefit there is there's little to no maintenance after the initial implementation, which is why it's so popular among our users. Lastly, I just want to touch on the user preferences a bit. So essentially, there are options with our preferences. So if within the organization you want to manage and control sort of user specific control your settings on a user level, you can do that. So we have kind of a central area where you control the permission of the locations that users have access to and the settings, and then those can kind of trickle down into your organization. Alternatively, it's not necessary. So there are options in terms of the Mail Manager settings and admin side of things, which is good. So then I'll just move on. So next slide, please, Luce. So next, I just want to talk a little bit about why we believe Mail Manager differs from other solutions. So the first is this email migration. So currently, Mail Manager has two tools that we use for email migration. The first is what we call file all messages in a folder. It's essentially quite user driven, so it allows users to file specific folders within their Outlook environment to certain Mail Manager locations. So this is essentially really helpful when users have all of those historic kind of folders with loads of emails. Mail Manager assists with moving those to the places that they need to go. The second is what we call our batch cloud filer. This is more typically what we've seen as more admin driven. And the benefit there is it takes emails that are sitting on Exchange Online in the form of a shared mailbox or a public folder and migrates that to SharePoint locations. So it essentially works by migrating kind of tens of thousands of emails across into a location that can then be searched against at a later point in time. The other thing that I'll pick out on this slide is the user interface, user experience. So Mail Manager is very low touch, which means it's successful in getting users on board and interested in using it. So when users file an email, we extract the necessary metadata that can then be searched against. So that's sort of as many fields as you get in an email. So it can be recipients, the sent date, file name, attachment size, those kinds of things that you wouldn't think to add as additional metadata. We harness that. Users can search that after the fact. We also allow users to add additional metadata, for example, adding a comment that they think that they'll remember at a later point in time. So that, alongside with our superior suggestions, allow users to file to locations that they need. So 9 times out of 10, our Mail Manager top suggestion is the one that you're looking for. So it really, really helps in terms of being low touch, because we're getting all that metadata for the user in the first place. We're showing them what suggestion they need to file to. So it's just almost like a one-click and you're good to go. So those are kind of the two things that I wanted to pick out on this slide. Now I'm going to just hand over quickly to Lucy to trigger a quick poll.
Amazing, thanks, Steph. So we're gonna trigger a poll just in a moment, which should be coming up on your screens now. So we're really interested to understand which of these tools your business uses for external collaboration on projects. Now you might use multiple, so you can select multiple. Is it Teams, Slack, email, project management software? So I'm just going to leave that up for a couple more seconds. We've got a couple more people responding. So unsurprisingly, email's winning at the moment, 86%. Interesting. Okay, perfect. Okay, so about an equal split between Teams and project management software. And then we've got 86% using email, which is, yeah, unsurprising, but thank you for sharing.
Cool. All right, so back to me for just to kind of, we thought it'd be good to just touch on kind of the trends and research that we've done in terms of the ecosystem that we find ourselves in. So although not new, building information modeling, BIM, continues to evolve and remain integrated and collaborative. So advanced BIM technologies are increasingly supporting kind of real-time collaboration among stakeholders to ultimately reach a goal of, better decision-making and project outcomes. You've also got what's called integrated project delivery, so IPD, and lean construction. So again, it's kind of trying to foster better communication, problem solving throughout the project lifecycle. You've got AI and machine learning, hot topic at the moment. And what those kinds of tools are doing is helping to kind of get to a point of predictive analytics for project and risk management, design optimization, process automation. So all of these things that we're kind of seeing come into the industry is all trying to achieve the same goal, is so that we can, maintain control and basically save everyone time. Next slide, please, Luz. So the next thing that I just wanted to mention, based on what's kind of happening, is this change with new Outlook. So within Microsoft, there's obviously they're pushing their new Outlook. So we're seeing dates coming through for September 2024. Where they'll no longer essentially support the mail and calendar apps. There's been no communication about kind of forcing users onto the new Outlook that are currently on the classic Outlook version, but obviously us being within the industry, we're kind of keeping a close eye on that. The new Outlook and kind of Copilot updates are very much going hand in hand with Microsoft at the moment. So what they're basically communicating is that using Copilot to basically help with automated meeting preparation, email thread navigation, things like that, organizing your meetings, telling you, what items you should be focusing on today. That's all kind of integrated within Copilot and New Outlook. So that's kind of the horizon that we're looking at in terms of Mail Manager and our planning for that future. So that kind of brings me to the roadmap. So Luce, if you can go to the next slide, please. So before I introduce the roadmap, what I want to quickly talk to is the 2 products that have come into our portfolio as of recent. So what we've got, and it kind of alludes to what we saw now with the polls and what Tim was talking about earlier with kind of correspondence management and chat on platforms like Teams is becoming more and more relevant. So Mail Manager is actually introduced, and it's in preview at the moment, a Teams chat filer. So essentially what that allows you to do is gather on an ad hoc basis. So recognizing that this chat might be important, these few messages and their attachments might be important. So I want to save them. So Mail Manager now essentially allows you to select those messages and save them to existing Microsoft 365 locations. So what that basically means is that at a later point in time, when you know that it was a conversation between Lucy, Tim, and myself, and it, spoke to a drawing of X, Y, and Z, you can then use the powerful Mail Manager search to find that message many years down the line. So essentially what it does is it saves those messages as an EML that you can then later search against. So it kind of just shows that we're really starting to push the boundaries and what correspondence management means, and showing that we're staying on trend. In terms of the next point that I wanted to mention before we get to the roadmap, so that's the web add-in. So we are on board with New Outlook, and essentially New Outlook currently doesn't support and won't support COM add-ins. The existing Mail Manager architecture is a COM add-in. It all stems from that within Classic Outlook. So we're in preview with an add-in at the moment, which supports filing to 365 locations, so SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive. And we're just about to launch the ability to search against those locations using a SharePoint search. So that's kind of the preface to the next point. So Luce, if we can go to June, please, to show what's coming for June 2024. So the roadmap I split into kind of Classic Outlook, add-in for New, and then app for Teams. For Classic, as you kind of heard the theme throughout, is we value the need to migrate existing emails from locations to assist with the implementation of Mail Manager when you eventually get to that point. This item here, support batch filing of PST files, that speaks to that. So we know that there's lots of organizations that have a need to get the emails out of these PST files and into somewhere that's searchable. So that kind of feature speaks to that. Next, we've got our file system filing for New Outlook. So as Tim alluded to earlier, we've got about 20% customers using filing to 365 locations. The rest are still very much filing to file system. So we recognize the need for that, and that's what that item is that we're going to be working towards. And then app for Teams, we are essentially allowing for some time for customers to use it, test it, and provide feedback. So if it is something that you'd like to get involved in, please do let us know. And that's something that you can certainly try and test, and we can engage on that. Next slide, please, Luce. The next thing is for September 2024. So again, Classic Outlook focusing on that migration. So currently with the existing Batch Cloud Filer tool that I alluded to earlier, it supports the filing of single shared mailboxes. So this work is to essentially allow you to select a host of shared mailboxes that you can then migrate against or migrate to. to SharePoint. The add-in for new Outlook, so we'll essentially by September be in a position to release the functionality, filing to non-SharePoint locations after significant testing. And then app for Teams. So essentially what we want to do is improve the overall experience of Teams. So with the time that will take June to September, basically allowing, or from now till September, allowing for significant development on the UX and UI. And then this work is essentially to allow for a better experience when actually opening the emails app in SharePoint. In Outlook from said location, so that it's looks nicer essentially. So that's the next one. On to the next one, Luce, for the future. So our future plans, I think I'll just speak a little bit about the Teams chat filer here. So essentially what we envision for the Teams chat filer is to have the one half of it is to essentially have a tool where ad hoc conversations can be, or ad hoc messages can be saved to certain locations. And that's like the one piece. And then the second piece that we've found from having various conversations with customers is that there's actually a need to, or a want to be able to harness entire project channels conversations. So essentially when you're in a project, you map that to Teams. That's essentially a Teams channel that then has correspondence solely about that project. Our vision for this next kind of piece of the Teams chat filer is to essentially allow a user to say, okay, that project's important. I want to file all the messages and attachments associated to that project. So I'm going to kind of click that, and that's going to go off and file. And you could essentially have it filing weekly or monthly or whatever the case. But that's kind of where we see our progression with the Teams chat filer. Just so that we can ensure that need for saving important correspondence is met with Mail Manager. So it's not necessarily focusing only on email anymore. We need to consider all of these changes that are happening, around us and cater for that, because there's a need, and we recognize that. So I think that's all from me. Been rambling for quite a bit. I'm going to open up the floor for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Steph. I hope that was useful, everyone, and some really, really exciting things on the roadmap. So yeah, really looking forward to it for clients and for us as well. So hopefully you're all strapped in. We have got a lot of questions. So get ready. So the first question we've got, guys, is, are both automated and manual steps available for archiving, storing emails?
Tim, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah, no problem. So the way that the system works is that it really focuses on the importance of making sure that emails are stored in the right place. Because if you think about it, the goal of the system is to share email, but clearly email can convey sensitive information. So the first use case is that you take your email in your inbox or multiple emails, you select them and you file them to locations. Same for outgoing mail. But at that point, the system will recommend a location. So we do have actually an automated and a semi-automated method of filing. But the most common way that people use the system is to rely on the suggestions to streamline the manual filing of emails, just because of the feeling that they need to have contact with the emails and make sure they're going to the right place. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Tim. So the next question is, are you able to keep the archived mails in your own Outlook inbox or remove them to a separate folder? I'm happy to take that one. So it's up to you guys. So as standard, a Mail Manager copy of that email will always move to your project folder as your kind of main central repository. If you'd like to keep a copy in your inbox, Mail Manager can do that by categorizing it automatically, or alternatively, it can move automatically into project folders within your inbox, which it automatically creates. So yes, that is possible. Okay. We've got a question about pre-recorded demos of this solution. Yes, we can do that. Or if you want to, we can also jump on a one-to-one session and go through it in a bit more depth through there. Are there any non-functional requisites which stipulate the speed of processing incoming and outgoing emails?
I'll pick that one up. So you select emails. That can be multiple emails. Sometimes it can be many tens, even hundreds of emails. You use the software to save them, but that's just creating a queue. And in the background, the system will work through that queue without interrupting you. The speed of processing that queue will depend on principally network. If you're sharing it to the internet or to one of your local resources, then the speed of processing that queue will depend upon how fast that connection is. But it's all done in the background, so it doesn't disturb you.
Thank you, Tim. We've got another one about multi-factor authentication. So are all users access to the service authenticated and encrypted? Is there any MFA?
Okay, so I'll get that one. So yes, the users are essentially authenticated using scopes that we provide. So we essentially use graph scopes, and when users need to access certain locations, we authenticate them, and those are essentially saved in a database and refreshed when needed.
Perfect. Thanks, Steph. How does Mail Manager manage permissions?
I'll get that one as well. So essentially, Mail Manager mimics the permissions associated to the location. So for example, when I spoke a little bit about auto discovery, if auto discovery is used, Mail Manager will essentially check whether that user has permissions in said destination. And if they do, that location will be shown. If they don't, then the permissions to that location will be revoked, and it'll no longer, the user will no longer be able to access it. So long as the permissions are managed on the location side, Mail Manager will respect that.
Perfect. Thanks, Steph. And what about when we talk about SharePoint? Is and if so, what metadata is pulled through into SharePoint?
Right. So essentially, the standard method of pushing email metadata into SharePoint, it's not standardized right now. So there are a bit of extra steps associated to getting to that point. Those steps are required for what we are doing with our SharePoint web search. So essentially, what we do in Mail Manager Desktop is push those messages up into SharePoint as the user has chosen a location within SharePoint to file to. We then have separate services that can then go and add metadata columns to those SharePoint sites that then will populate that metadata based on that field. So when SharePoint is configured in this way, Mail Manager then has the ability to point our search UI to SharePoint, and then users can search against those. So the short answer is it's not kind of stock standard, but there's steps that we can take to do that, and then users can search kind of online with SharePoint. Hope that answers the question. If not, please just reach out and we can work through it.
Thanks, Steph. So I think this is probably a question for me. So when people leave the business, will we still have access to all emails they've received? Absolutely. That's the value of Mail Manager. Every bit of data that's been filed is getting moved to your project folders in your own environment. So that might be your server or SharePoint. You have access to that data. Yes, you'd probably have access being an IT to get access to their mailbox, but the benefit of this is it's all nicely organized against project folders. So it's in a much better state. Okay. What happens with duplicate emails?
So when a user files an email, when Mail Manager copies that email to a location, we basically create a standardized file name pattern, and that consists of the subject, the sender, and the time, date, and and that will then deduplicate any messages that have that exact same file name pattern. So that's essentially how we handle deduplication. When users then go back and potentially add a comment or something like that, if they amend that that file, that will basically amend it. So if I were to be the person adding a comment at a later stage, that file would then be amended, the file name with SF, for example. Those are my initials. So you never actually lose that that initial filed message.
Perfect. Thank you. Last question now, because I'm just cautious of time. Is it possible for the tool to extract and store / archive files from emails?
Not at this stage, no. Well,
Well,
essentially what we
at
do,
the point of filing, we can.
Yes. At the point of filing, we can. Thank you, Tim. You can answer that one if you want.
Well, you've answered it. At the point
Yeah.
of filing, you can choose to do something different or additional, I should say, with the attachments linked to the email. So you can put them into a different place or into the same place as the email, and the system will strip them at that point.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
Perfect. Good stuff, guys. Well, thank you everyone very much for joining. I'm just going to chuck my email in the chat to everyone if anyone needs to book in any one-to-one calls or wants any more information. But I hope it was useful. I certainly learned some new things there, so thank you guys. And yeah, have a fantastic rest of your evening, and we'll hopefully hear from you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you,
guys.
everyone. Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.